Welcome to today's Ethnic Media Services Zoom Roundtable Seminar. I'm Sunita Sarabji, your moderator for today's briefing. So, thus far, more than 55 million people have already voted in the US election. Yet, one of the most consequential issues of our lifetime, climate change, has largely slipped off the radar for both voters and candidates in this election cycle. Bill McKibben, one of our speakers today, says the outcome of this election could reverberate for over the next 1 million years. Our speakers today will discuss how they mobilize their communities to think about climate change and environmental degradation. They will also provide a broad perspective on what's at stake. We are honored to host such a stellar panel today. Our speakers are Eric Bendix, a resident of Asheville, North Carolina, who will share his experience of battling the tornadoes that accompanied Hurricane Helene and the devastation his community still faces 7 weeks after. If I'm correct, Eric, it's been 7 weeks. Sharon Levine, founder of Rise St. James, will talk about how she mobilized her community to fight against a petrochemical factory being built in her neighborhood, known as Louisiana's Cancer Alley. Ms. Levine is the 2021 recipient of the Goldman Environmental Prize and was also named as Time Magazine's 100 Most Influential People this year. Sissy Trin is the executive director at the Southeast Asian Community Alliance. Ms. Trin mobilized low-income communities in Southern California to reclaim the Los Angeles River. And finally, Bill McKibben, founder of Third Act, which organizes people over the age of 60 for action on climate change and justice. Mr. McKibben is one of the US's pre-eminent environmentalists. We will take questions from reporters immediately after each speaker presents, and we will send videos along with follow-up collateral after today's briefing. So let's begin with Eric Bendix, who provides an on-the-ground view from Asheville, North Carolina. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you, Sunita, and thanks to all of you. It's a bit of a surprise to me to be in this position, and I can pretty much only speak from my own experience. There are a lot of other folks out there who went through all kinds of stuff with this hurricane. I'm sitting here. What you see behind me is the log house my wife and I built in the 1980s. We've lived here for 42 years. We came here as kind of Jewish, back to the land hippie homesteaders in a valley full of Southern Baptist tobacco growers. And things have changed a lot over the last bunch of decades. There are a lot of people have been moving in. Asheville is a tourist town. Our baseball team is called the Asheville Tourists. And people have been flocking here, I would say primarily from California and Florida, to get away from climate problems. A lot of people have moved here from California to get away from fire. A lot of people have moved from Florida to get away from hurricanes. And as I was just saying to Sunita, you can't run and you can't hide. It's like it hit us really hard. The historical pattern of hurricanes relative to these are like the only real mountains in the South. We live at about 3,000 foot elevation, and usually what's happened with hurricanes in the past is when they make landfall, they stall out, they slow down, they lose force. What happened with this one is it made landfall in Florida the evening of September 26th, and it was here by dawn the next morning. And it hit with extreme force right out these windows. We were watching trees knock each other over. We had, I think, multiple tornadoes. we I mean, we own about just under 40 acres of land, which we bought back when it was cheap. Um, and um, on our piece, we have about a mile long gravel road leading up to our place. There were at least 100 trees that fell across our road, and probably thousands. We lost easily half of our forest. Further up the valley here, it's even worse. It's just utter devastation. The winds, not so much where we are, but just above us and down the valley here, the winds, if they didn't knock trees off, they stripped them of all their leaves. So it's a moonscape. Um, I uh, right after the storm took a bunch of hours, when it was over, I tried to survey the damage. It was all I could do to reach the local road. Um, I guess the second day we figured out that we needed to chainsaw a path through the debris to our nearest neighbor, about a third of a mile away. And we discovered from them that down in the valley, there was a kind of a hippie commune that we had never known about. Um, that the night of the storm, there was a man there who went out in the storm and got hit in the head and broke his neck. And the community pulled together and strapped him to a ladder and got him on an ATV and actually managed to get him out to a hospital. He's actually okay, but it galvanized the community. The community just whipped itself together really fast around that. And I guess the other thing was, and this I think is a typical story here in the mountains. The bridge to our valley washed out in the storm, so we were completely cut off for at least a week. Um, but we got to know our neighbors in a big hurry, and these community meetings were, I mean, those people down in the commune did it was just amazing. I mean, they ran these meetings where it was like one person speaks at a time. We're only talking about things that affect the whole community, no side conversation. I mean, it was just so disciplined and organized. And we split up into different committees. There was a medical team, a team that cooked hot lunches for everybody every day. We had daily meetings. There was a communications team that involved sending teenagers out on dirt bikes to fan out through the neighborhood to make sure everybody was okay. A big priority was cutting everybody free. I mean, we were actually because our road is so long, we were the last ones to actually get road access. And we finally got power back on day 19. And miraculously, we happened to get internet. Most of our neighbors still don't have internet, but our line happened to be buried under our road and somehow survived what was happening up above. So that's how I'm able to talk to you. Um, so that's kind of the scene. It being October, a lot of the nut tree, oak trees and the big old growth trees were heavy with acorns. They were top heavy with all this fruit. And of course, they don't bend in the wind. And so they just got creamed by the gale. So we now have like root balls sticking up everywhere in the forest. Um, and as I mentioned, since the hurricane, I mean, today we've had a little bit of gentle rain, but up until now, it's been bone dry, and we're at major risk for fire at this point because there's so much debris. And um, one of the things I started talking about in the community early on is what are we going to do with all this debris? I mean, there's just the quantities of it are just beyond belief. And a lot of folks are, the county says that, bring it to the curbside, we'll pick it up. Well, it's a joke. I mean, that's not going to happen, and God knows when that might happen. And that the temptation is, I think, very strong to just burn it. And I've been trying to get my neighbor, and pretty successfully. I think everybody's kind of waking up to the fact that that's not the route to go. Um, I think we have another conversation when sort of later on that we need to have, which is that most folks out here in the countryside, first of all, they're not on municipal water. So the fire prevention is completely limited by how many ponds and swimming pools and stuff we've got. And everybody thinks that they're independent because they've got propane. They've got propane generators and stuff. And in a forest fire, that's a recipe for disaster. So later on, we need to have a conversation about how to wean ourselves off of that. I mean, to me, it's like a classic climate dilemma. It's like the quick, easy fix is to burn your brush and rely on propane, but it's a total recipe for disaster. And yeah, and just to give you an idea of the scale of this, I mean, it's pretty hard to like even take in how big of a thing this is. Um, we've got one of our tourist attractions is a thing called the Arboretum, North Carolina Arboretum. Tourists go there to look at the pretty trees and plants and stuff. Well, the Army Corps of Engineers is down there right now trying to extract fallen trees. And they thought they needed to pull out about 1,000 trees. Now it's 20,000. And just the amount of acres of destroyed forest in the path of the hurricane, I think it covers like 27 counties. It's over 800,000 acres. It's like creeping up on 1 million acres of forest. Um, yeah. So I I had been we had been working for years already just on our little piece of land with an outfit called ecoforesters, and they've been saying for years, actually the forest is not. It was already not healthy the way it was. Back at the end of the 19th century, most of these forests were clear cut. And so the forest is mostly all the same age, and that's not healthy. It should be all different ages. So there is actually an opportunity here now that the forest canopy has been ripped open of kind of steering things in a healthier direction. But it depends on really some very focused action in the next couple of years, particularly controlling invasive plants, which are, I mean, people in the South are familiar with kudzu. We have other invasive plants, a thing called bittersweet that tends to gobble up forests and prevent them from rebounding. Um, we have a chance now to hold that in check if we do it well. If we wait too long, it'll gobble things up.
Eric, we have a
Yeah,
number of questions for you in the chat, and I would love to
sure,
start with
sure.
some
Fire away.
questions.
I'm happy to.
Yeah. So, first of all, this question comes. Has this made you and your community think differently about climate change?
It's brought a lot of things into pretty sharp focus. I mean, the choice that I was just talking I mean, the slogan I've come up with is feed the soil instead of soiling the air. It's like we've got all this debris. We could plow it under and mulch it and turn it into biochar and all the rest of that. or we can do the quick thing and take a match to it. And we really, I think our whole community is like waking up to that choice in a big way. Um, and that's that. I would say, what my wife says is we lost a forest, but we gained a community. It's like suddenly we've got this like huge group of people who are totally galvanized around doing stuff. And it's no, I can tell you, nobody talks politics. No, this ain't about politics. This is about whether people are safe and about what people need. And it's like in a hospital. You don't ask somebody in a hospital who they voted for. You vote them.
Yes, yes.
Right.
Henrietta Burrows has a question for you. Henrietta.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sunita. Eric, uh, in all of the meetings that you've had, have you all talked about emergency preparedness? How can you prepare for the next coming disaster? And you've answered my question in terms of climate action activities.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a lot of what we're focused on is I mean, and there's some things are less likely to be a problem, like because of all the downed trees, the water flow is impeded. So we probably won't have the same problems with flooding that we had because the water has slowed down, but we got fire to deal with. So
Eric, thank you so much. There are a couple more comments for you in the chat, but in the interest of time, we're going to move on to Sharon Levine, who is the founder of St. James Rise. She will discuss how she mobilized her community in Louisiana's Cancer Alley to fight against a chemical plant being built on her ancestors' graves. Sharon, such a pleasure to see you in virtual person. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for having me. And I live in St. James Parish, called Cancer Alley. It's an 85-mile stretch between New Orleans and Baton Rouge. And in 2018, when our governor, John Bell Edward, announced that a $9.4 billion plastic plant would be built in St. James, where I live. And I was in another organization and they said we couldn't fight it because the governor approved it and it was a done deal and the parish council was going to vote for it anyway. I sat in that meeting for 2.5 years and listened to them talk about all the industry that's in St. James and do nothing about it. And so I felt in my heart that we already have 12 industries within a 10-mile radius. And to bring this monster of a plant 2 miles from my home within a 10-mile radius, this company bought 2,400 acres of land. Sugarcane farmers had this land. And we have 4 grave sites on that property. One of the grave sites is called Buena Vista. We had an archaeologist to do the research and tell us the names. Some of the names are my ancestors' names. We have another one, it's called Alina, Acadiana, and they built roads on the grave sites of our ancestors. We didn't even know there were grave sites there until Formosa got their permit to be built. And when we found out about the graves, Formosa already knew about the graves. They did not alert our public officials, even after they gave them the air permit and the wetlands permit and all of that. So we brought it to the parish council at a meeting, thinking they would revoke that permit when we told them about our ancestors. They did not. They voted for the plant to come in. That's what started our fight. We started on October of 2018. They voted for the plant in January of 2019. And it's been a fight ever since. And we went to court. the judge ruled against Formosa. They had 10 different counts. The judge ruled against all those counts, asking this plant to vacate the premises. They appealed it. They went to the courts. We went to court twice on Zoom. We went twice in person last year in November and December. We appealed the judge's decision. In July, they rejected our decision. So all we have now left is the Army Corps of Engineers. If they approve the wetlands permit, then Formosa can build. But we know that our fight is not in vain, and we know all the work that we have done, and we know Formosa is not coming in. We don't know how, but we do know in our heart that Formosa is not coming here. If Formosa would come, it would be a death sentence for us. We are already dying. We have people having cancer, asthma, and different illnesses. And we have 12 already within a 10-mile radius where I live. And we have 100 storage tanks. You know, they store the oil in those big storage tanks. We have 100 within that 10-mile radius. When I was teaching school, at the meetings, they would say that all of this area will be industrial. But it didn't ring a bell to me. I had no idea that the plan was to kill us off, poison us off, or whatever they had plans to do, but not to buy us out. And we don't want to be bought out. But the plan was for them to build more and more and more. And it's another industry that's trying to come in within this 10-mile radius. We're fighting that one. It's called DG Fuse. There's another one that's trying to come in on the east bank, and we're fighting that one also. They go to these communities where they know the people would not speak up. So they thought that they had St. James sold up until they met Rise St. James. That's why we formed the organization. We have the industries that's already there. They are polluting us. They're on the wetlands. Koch brothers bought our school, our high school where I was teaching for 38 years. They bought our high school. We built a new one 10 miles away. And people cried when they found out that our parish officials and our school board members agreed to sell our high school without us knowing. When we found out about it, they had a public meeting to let us know that the high school was sold. People voiced their opinion, but it was too late. The deal was already closed. And so, just like we are the dumping ground, we are in the middle of Cancer Alley. And we're the worst area in Cancer Alley because we have 12 industries and refineries within a 10-mile radius. People over there are getting sick. I have 2 brothers with prostate cancer. My neighbor on one side died. The other one died also with throat cancer. You have to come to see it for yourself. In 2021, Administrator Regan came and he saw what we were going through, and it touched his heart. And he'd been trying to do things. We have the Hans rules that are trying to help us. And he tried to stop this other industry from polluting the people. Our new governor, Jeff Landry, filed a lawsuit against EPA to stop them from helping us. So now we're trying to get a rally at the Capitol to talk to our governor and ask him to stop polluting us because we want to live. And if these industries come in, we will not live. So we're asking our governor. We'll have speakers from all over the state that's impacted by these petrochemical industries. And so that's going to be on the 22nd of this month. And it's a lot. It's so hurtful to stand up here and tell you how we are dying. Our community literally is dying. That's all we could do. We go to these meetings, we talk about it, and nothing is being done. These people, politicians and industry has the power over the people. The people listen to industry. I shouldn't have to do this. I'm a grandmother. I had to retire from teaching because I started doing this work. I devote my whole life to doing this work. I want to sit around with my grandchildren and enjoy life, take them places, do things with them. I'm doing this. I don't mind doing this because I'm saving my community. All we need is help. Shut down these polluters that's polluting us right now. That would be a big help. So thank you for listening to my story.
Thank you so much. That was so moving, Sharon. There are so many questions for you here. Let's start with Prachi Singh. Prachi? Are you available, Prachi? I will ask her question for her. Prachi asks, you mentioned people are hesitant to speak up. Could you please speak on the efforts it took to bring people into this fight with you? And do you have any advice for activists to gather courage and bring awareness in their communities? How did you do that, Sharon?
First of all, we organized. First meeting I had was in my den with about 8 people. 2 people died since that meeting, died with cancer. And the next meeting we had was in my garage. The meeting was getting bigger. And as we organized, people came to help us. Different organizations came to our march that we had on November 3rd. And then we had another march in 2019, 5 days in May. Then we had another one 10 days in October. The governor won't even listen to us. We went to the Capitol to speak to John Bell Edward, our governor. He walked out the back door. The people came and told us, we were in the office waiting to meet with him. They came out and told us, oh, he just went out the back door. He's going to a barbecue. We came way from all these areas to speak with him. He would not even speak with us. When he ran for re-election, I made sure I got his attention, and I asked him to stop Formosa from coming into St. James. He looked at me like he didn't even care, and he said, I'm going to do a health study, and he walked away. We never got a health study, but we're trying to get grants now to get one, but he never did anything to help us.
And Sharon, have environmental impact reports been done? And what did they show that could potentially keep this plant away?
For example, the EPA told one area to shut it down in 90 days. The governor, the attorney general in Louisiana filed a lawsuit against the EPA to keep it open for 2 more years. And they won over the EPA.
Wow, it's incredible. Henrietta Burrows, please ask your question.
Thanks, Sunita. Sharon, what is the ethnicity of the parish? And I'm wondering if that's a factor in the fact that you all have been ignored. And given the health problems within the community, how do those advocating for these plants explain away the dangers that they bring?
The industry said they are not bringing any danger to us, but they are. And we have about 85% in the 5th district African American, and throughout the whole parish we have about 21,000 residents, but it's 50-50 black and white. But the industry claim that they are safe and they're not polluting us. They are lying, and they pollute us so much until you can't go outside and breathe clean air. You walk out the door and you smell. If you come to my house and sit outside for a little while, you have to go back inside. My little grandson is having nosebleeds. My granddaughter had nosebleeds. My daughter had to take her to the doctor the other day to find out why she keep having nosebleeds. They sent her home from school, and she's not the only one. And people in Baton Rouge told my other daughter that the teachers are having nosebleeds. They're not too far from the industry, and the students are having nosebleeds. But nobody cares. Nobody trying to help us. The governor is strictly for industry. He don't care about the people. He care about industry. And they lie and say the industry is not polluting us. We're not getting sick from industry.
So what are you getting sick from?
They say our diet. That's one thing they say, the diet.
Wow. There's been a lot of coverage about Cancer Alley. Has that helped in any way? The fact that, a nation is now focused on where you live.
Yes, it helps. It bringing the word out to the people, let people know that we are dying.
Yeah.
And we're trying to get President Biden to speak with us. He always mentioning Cancer Alley, and we're hoping that he do something before he get out of office.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sharon, thank you so much for sharing your story. And as reporters, I would like to offer you as a resource for our reporting, specifically about Cancer Alley.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you again.
You're welcome.
We move on next to Sissy Trin, another activist who will share how she mobilized low-income communities in Southern California to reclaim the Los Angeles River. Those of you who attended the EMS Expo in Sacramento last August may remember Sissy's excellent remarks at our climate change panel there. Welcome back, Sissy.
Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're at. So just to give you a little bit of context, I work in Chinatown, Los Angeles, which is one of the poorest neighborhoods in LA County, but also about maybe 50 to 100 miles from where most of the wildfires that you hear about in Southern California. And so a lot of our residents are basically so poor that they're regularly skipping meals to make rent. They can't afford a $4 a month rent increase. I know this because, during the pandemic, we have been providing emergency rental assistance, and I had to regularly hear these kinds of stories, from low-income seniors, from families who work in sweatshops and restaurants that, pay under the table, pay less than minimum wage. And so when you talk about climate change, it feels very far away, not just physically, but also just kind of psychologically if you're, like, again, skipping meals regularly to meet rent. And so when we talk about this kind of existential crisis, oftentimes we're coming at it from our position and not where our families and our seniors are coming from, right? Which is they have more immediate needs, right? They're, one rent increase away from becoming homeless. And so to talk about climate change feels almost dismissive of the thing that's right in front of them. However, we talk about it. We oftentimes talk about how these threats immediately impact their daily lives and also where the opportunities are, right? So the city and the county have started about maybe 15 years ago, looking at how to do climate mitigation and do investments to protect communities, reduce the impacts, and increase the opportunities to address climate change. And our community is actually in many ways ground zero, just because we are the center for our regional transit system. We have the LA River next door. And so there's a lot of opportunities to do climate investments, right? To green, a neighborhood that is one of the most polluted in the state, in fact. We have all these freeways, we have heavy rail, and we have a lot of factories. And city and county were touting these plans and saying it's going to make the neighborhood greener and nicer and all these things. And for us, what we started actually seeing, and that the county and the city had kind of underestimated, was the real estate speculation that would soon follow, right? And so we started seeing developers and property owners listing, putting out real estate listings and saying prime investment opportunity. There's going to be billions of dollars that are going to be put in by the state and like local government to make this neighborhood nicer, right? And, this is going to be the next Beverly Hills or whatnot. Obviously landlords see that, they either sell or they make the buildings nicer and, jump up the rents. And so we had to kind of explain how these climate investments were having a destabilizing impact for our communities. I'm reading like the comments and the questions in the chat, and, people are feeling a sense of existential dread, right? Like, where do we even start? Is there even hope? I'm an organizer, and as pessimistic as I am, at the end of the day, my job is to create opportunities for our local residents, for our youth, our seniors, our families to actually create change. And so there has to be a certain amount of optimism and opportunity, right? And so we were looking at what are the opportunities, because we're not going to fight against a new park coming into community, right? And a lot of our residents have argued, we don't want parks, we don't want these cleanups because the fear of gentrification, right? For us, we're seeing tens of billions of dollars coming into our neighborhoods and climate investments. Well, that money comes with the opportunity for jobs, right? And that money comes with the opportunity to support our local small businesses through local procurement policies. And so we really kind of focused on, yeah, we know the speculation is coming in, but how do we create policies to minimize that speculation, put the reins on it, and then also direct all the investment to support low-income residents and small businesses so that we uplift people out of poverty, right? So that's how I kind of see climate change as like an opportunity to address these other issues that feel separate, but really aren't. And so, advocating for, like I said, local hire policies, local procurement policies, and then also as part of the LA River Master Plan, we actually got the county to incorporate a housing stabilization chapter, and they kind of identified like maybe about a dozen or 2 dozen strategies that the county could implement to, acknowledging that river restoration is going to create a speculative impact. Here are some strategies that the county should look at adopting to mitigate that and stabilize communities. And so some of this was, kind of like collecting information and data to identify neighborhoods that are at high risk, looking at strategic partnerships between the housing and the climate sectors. And then the last thing was money. And so we got the County Board of Supervisors to include in the meeting where they adopted the River Master Plan, a separate kind of parallel strategy, which was the establishment of an affordable housing land bank. So a land bank is basically, a tool to kind of, if you look at areas that are going to be at risk because of public investment. And so the land bank comes in and acquires land, acquires property in these areas that we know will be gentrifying in 5 years. Before the gentrification happens, in order to protect and preserve the existing affordable housing stock or to increase the supply of affordable housing, right? And so they adopted the master plan and the land bank, and also allocated $50 million of the county's American Rescue Plan Act allocation for to provide seed funding for the land bank. And so again, kind of looking at these issues as not just like immediate threats, but opportunities to kind of connect to what people want to or need to kind of deal with on a day-to-day basis. Because I talk to a lot of climate scientists, and I will say they are terrible communicators. And I think part of my job, right, as an organizer is to connect these big picture issues into ways in which local community residents can feel like, oh, I have a stake in this. Oh, and I also have a role to play to kind of make things better, right? And I would say as reporters, all of you guys have that role too, is how do you tell the story of Cancer Alley, for example, but not in a way where people walk away feeling like there's no hope, we should give up, but to feel a sense of inspiration and a desire to do something better, right? A desire to kind of step in and support. Maybe, I'm not going to support the folks in Cancer Alley because that's very far away, but what can I do locally in LA, right? To address the same issues that our local tenants are facing, right? And kind of see these things as connected, and that the story of Cancer Alley and, the story that, Eric in North Carolina is providing as like, oh, these are people on the other side of the country. They're facing similar issues. And what kind of inspiration, what kind of tools and strategies are they adopting that I can kind of tweak for my local community and vice versa?
Thank you so much, Sissy. We have so many questions for you in the chat. Let's start. I'm going to go to Renee Barbie. Renee, please ask your question.
Thank you.
Yes.
I would like to know, do you believe there is anything our government can do to address the issue of climate change? It's getting worse every year for many states. SoCal has extremely hot summers and hardly any rain, excluding this year for the first time in years. Thank you.
Whether there's hope or not, we're spending the money, right? We're spending the money every time there's a disaster and rebuilding has to happen, right? Whether you believe in climate change or not, and I assume everybody on this call does, but I always talk to climate deniers and they're like, whether you believe it or not doesn't matter because we're spending billions and trillions of dollars to fix the hurricanes, to fix the wildfires, that kind of stuff, right? Whether there's hope or not, I think that, like I said before, I tend to be somewhat pessimistic, but in order to do the work I do, I have to have some level of like, where's the opportunity to create change, right? And so if we kind of keep pushing the narrative that it's too late, then that's really just serving the people who are looking to speculate on climate change, right? The people who are coming in after disasters to make a quick buck. As a people who are like all rebuilding being done in a way that's equitable, that's strategic, and that actually leaves communities safer after, these hurricanes and wildfires are long gone.
Thank you. We have a question from Peter Sherman. Peter, please ask your question.
Thank you, Sunita. My question, I guess, is for either Sissy or Shirley. I spoke to someone recently here in the Bay Area working in the tech space. He works in artificial intelligence, and they're working on something to help buildings, which I don't know if people know that buildings are one of the major emitters of greenhouse gases. And so through artificial intelligence, they're working to help buildings become more efficient and thereby reduce their emissions and make an impact on the climate. There was a real optimism in his voice, and I think you see that a lot with people working in the tech space around climate. There's this sort of sense that with tech, you can achieve anything. And it struck me because it's contrasts very much with people in the climate policy space who tend to be very sour and tend to be very dour. I worked in the climate policy space for a while, and I was told at the very beginning, get used to losing. And I always remembered that. And so I'm wondering, Sissy, if you feel that tech optimism on climate is warranted, if it's misplaced, if you share it, what are your thoughts on tech and its ability to sort of move the needle on climate?
So my personal opinion, right, not empirical fact of any sort, is that people who go into tech tend to be more optimistic as kind of a personality thing, right? They're always pitching like this is going to be the future of, tech. This is going to be the future of climate change. I have a solution. That's just kind of like who goes into tech and who ends up kind of, like if you're pitching investors, you don't pitch investors saying my solution is going to fail. You're pitching them by nature, to talk about how my solution is going to be that magic bullet that will solve all of our climate woes, right? People who go into climate policy or people who go into social justice work are trying to fix a very fundamentally systemic problem. So all they see are the problems, and they come in with a sense of pessimism because, again, they're trying to fix this huge problem and they don't focus on the opportunities as much. I oftentimes have to balance my natural tendency to be pessimistic with a sense of I need to, when we're organizing community members, some of our victories can take 10, 15 years. So I have to, as my job, in order to keep people motivated to keep fighting, identify where there are spaces for optimism, where there are spaces for celebrating successes, basically every 6 months, largely because we work with high school students and, students graduate really quickly. and go off to college, go off to their jobs, that kind of stuff. And for them, 6 months is a long time. For all of us who are older, 6 months is nothing. But, when you're 14, it feels like a long time, right? And so we're looking at different ways in which we can identify like progress, even if it's a small thing. I think it's necessary to keep us going, because again, my natural tendency is to be pessimistic. If I were a more optimistic person, I'd be doing a different job, to be
Thank
quite
you,
honest.
Sissy. Thank you so much for your comments. We move to Bill McKibben, whose work many of you must already be familiar with. Welcome, Bill.
And I think you have to there. Now I'm unmuted. What a pleasure to join
there
you
you
all.
are.
What a
Welcome.
pleasure to get to follow Eric and Sharon and Sissy, who do such amazing work. I'm just going to try and provide a little bit of overview from the global level here to try and explain why we at Third Act and so many other environmentalists have been working so hard on this election. I wrote the first book about what we now call climate change, what we then called the greenhouse effect, back in the 1980s when I was in my 20s. So I've been working on this a long time. And there are two things to note about our current moment. One is that the things that we were warning about 35 and 40 years ago are now the things that are happening every day someplace. They're the things that Eric's been living through in these past months. And there's no pleasure at all in saying, I told you so. There's only the understanding that, we're at a point where we're very near the biggest of the tipping points that will make these changes deeper and permanent. And that's very scary. The last 18 months on our planet have seen not the steady rise in temperature that we've been observing for decades, but a very dramatic spike in the temperature of the Earth and the temperature of the oceans. And that spike is what's allowing extraordinary rain events like the ones that accompanied Helene. It's the one that's triggered the extraordinary heat waves that we've seen in places like Delhi, second biggest city on Earth, where the temperature in much of the spring was above 110 degrees day after day after day, or in places like Phoenix, where the temperature was above 110 late into October this year. These augur very badly for what's happening in the next few years as the poles melt, as the seas rise. And that is why scientists have told us that if we're to get any grip at all on the rising temperature of the planet, we need to move very, very fast. In fact, they've given us a deadline. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has told us that we need to cut emissions in half by 2030 to stay on anything like the path that we agreed to in Paris just 8 years ago. 2030, for those of you doing the math, is 5 years and now 2 months away. The next president of the United States will take office in January of 2029 after this election. So in many ways, this is the last election that deeply and powerfully counts for what, how hot the planet ends up being. And of course, one of the candidates in that election, Donald Trump, has announced that beginning day one, he will drill, and that, among other things, he will stop wind, whatever that means. So the news that I've been sharing has been bad and hard, but there is another side to it too that makes this year's election just as important. And that is that we're at the very same time that we're seeing this dramatic rise in temperature, we're also finally seeing the start of the dramatic rise in the switch to renewable energy around the planet. Beginning in about June of 2023, so June of last year, we reached the point where humans were installing more than a gigawatts worth of solar panels every day. To put that in perspective, that's the equivalent of a nuclear power plant's worth of solar panels every day. Half of that's in China, but that leaves a fair amount in the rest of the world, including here, where thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act, which was the direct result of activism by environmentalists over many years, especially those young people in the Sunrise Movement who coalesced around the Green New Deal. As a result of that, the United States is spending serious money for the first time on this clean energy transition. And the way that the law is written, a large share of that money is being spent in the environmental justice communities around this country that need it the most. Places that have suffered the most from the fossil fuel economy, places that have been most dependent on the fossil fuel economy. We're seeing something quite remarkable start to happen in this country with the spread of clean energy and with the spread of the manufacturing to support it. If the White House stays in more or less its current hands, if President Biden transitions to President Harris, one can expect that to continue, that outlay of money that underlies this transition going to communities across America. But Project 2025 has made it very clear that that will be one of the first targets of a Trump administration. And I think that may be the single biggest reason why the British think tank Carbon Brief has estimated that a Trump presidency would produce over its 4 years an extra 4 billion tons of carbon dioxide. Again, for comparison purposes, that's equivalent to the annual emissions of the EU and Europe, EU and Japan combined. That's what we'd be adding with a Trump presidency. So at Third Act, where I work, which I founded, which is an organization of people over the age of 60 across the country, we've mobilized tens of thousands of people to be working on this election. They've spent the last couple of years working on other things, mostly on trying to get the big banks that finance things down in especially Sharon's part of the world, the big LNG export terminals and things, to get the banks to cut it out. But for the duration of the election, they've been very laser focused on turning out voters, especially older voters. And we think that elders are going to make a decisive difference in this election. We shall see on Tuesday. But we've had tens of thousands of people phone banking, knocking doors, and writing millions of postcards into the swing states, trying to get across the idea that we do not want to be the first generation that leaves the planet a worse place than we found it, which I think is really the bottom line for this coming election. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. There are quite a few questions for you. Peter, please ask your question.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for your time today, Bill, and thank you for your work on climate. It's deeply appreciated, to say the least. I'm curious because, you know, countries like China, India, developing countries that are producing emissions at an increasing pace, it's clear that global cooperation is going to be needed to sort of address this issue. And yet we're seeing exactly the opposite sort of develop as the world sort of fragments again. Where do you see opportunities to sort of develop the kind of global cooperation that's necessary, clearly necessary? And I guess as part of that question, I mean, America, the United States, and Europe are the main culprits in emissions and have been the least interested in things like climate finance and investing in sort of carbon credits and things like that. And so I'm just curious to get your take on what you think America's responsibility is in this space.
Well, as I've been writing for a very long time, I think we have an enormous moral and practical responsibility here. And the first thing to say is we can't walk away from the discussion, which is what happened when Donald Trump pulled us out of the Paris Accords in his first term. We very much need America to be represented at these global talks so that global civil society can pressure America to do much more than it's doing. And, I mean, the irony of all of this is I spend far more of my life trying to pressure politicians than I do trying to elect them. But you got to elect people that you have some chance of pressuring. I think that there's a couple of things going on the international level that are really important. I think the first thing that America should be doing is ending its export of fossil fuels to the rest of the world, because that's undercutting the efforts to move to renewables, especially in Asia. And the case where this really matters is the decision that the Biden administration thankfully made last year to cease, at least temporarily, the granting of new permits for LNG export terminals. Liquefied natural gas from the Gulf of Mexico is the biggest climate bomb on the planet. And if we allow this trade to continue to grow, we already lead the world in it. It will fatally undercut the possibility of real action. And then, as you point out, Peter, we have to be engaged dramatically in the effort to find the financing for the global South to make this transition. Truthfully, I think more of that's going to come from private funds than public. And so I think that one of the roles of the US government, which is a dominant player at places like the IMF and the World Bank, is to figure out how to de-risk those investments enough that the huge pools of capital represented by, say, American pension funds are able to put that money to work in the places where it's most dramatically needed around the world, which is precisely in this transition to clean energy in the global South, which will be a huge boon to the global South, which has great advantages in sunlight and wind, and which would no longer need to go into endless balance of payments deficits to afford the next container load of oil or natural gas.
Bill, we have a number of questions for you, and I wonder if you could stay on for just a few minutes longer.
I'm afraid I have to get off at the top of the hour. I apologize.
Pilar Marrero, our associate editor, joins us from Valencia, where I think you know what's going on there. Pilar wanted to just share a little bit of her story, and then we'll ask a final question. Pilar?
Well, hi, guys. So talking about climate change and whether people are aware, well, here in Valencia, we just had a phenomenon called the cold drop, the gota fria, which is when colder air coming from the north hits the warmer air from the Mediterranean and produces rain. However, the one that we had this past week was unprecedented. The amount of water that fell by minute in areas of Valencia was unprecedented completely. Nobody has ever seen something like this here. And so it didn't affect the city of Valencia where I am, but it affected the outskirts. There's very close towns that are connected with trains and metro that people travel and commute to and from that are absolutely destroyed. I just read a last minute report saying that there might be up to 2,000 disappeared. 200 people have died, confirmed death. There are bodies being found by the minute. This means that Spain will have its worst catastrophe, I think, in its history, other than wars, right? And of course, people are not really talking about, what costed too much, etc., but they will. And the fact that this happened in the way that it did, I think it's clear that we are all going to be faced with the consequences of climate change. I just moved from LA, California, where, you know, we have fires all the time. I moved to Valencia, and here I am in the middle of this mess. Thankfully, nothing happened to the city. But yeah, so that's my contribution. It's just one more reason to pay attention to this.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Pilar, for sharing your story. Bill, a final question. In a recent Guardian article that you wrote, you spoke about the effects of this election reverberating for the next 1 million years, possibly. And you've spoken a little bit about that in your conversation here. I wonder if you could just codify it as a final 30-second soundbite for us.
Yes. Climate change is the biggest thing that humans have ever done by far. And if we don't get it under control very soon, biologists say we will be kicking off, among other things, the 6th great extinction in the history of this planet. We can see all those extinctions in the geological record, and that's what future worlds will know of our time, that we were unable to bring ourselves to do what needed to be done, even though we had the tools close to hand. That would be a terrible epitaph to write for our time. We don't need to, but if we're going to change that outcome, we need to move very, very fast as movements and as governments to make big change happen quickly.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We very much welcome your comments. Reporters, thank you for joining us. We'll see you next Friday.